Okay, so this is the second part of our discussion of Shiva Asar Tammuz and the two other minor fast days, Tzom Gedalia and Asara B'Tevet. So we saw already that the Talmudic rule says very clearly: when there is peace, you don't fast. When there is shmad, persecution, you do fast. When there's neither peace nor persecution, it's optional. And we saw also that Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, writes that even if you had a custom previously, you don't have to. You could go back on the custom. You're allowed to change the custom because the conditions were built into the custom. Already when the custom was established by the prophets, they said it was built in that it depends on the circumstances. And finally, we saw what Rabbeinu Tam ruled to a woman who 8 days after giving birth needed to eat on Tzom Gedalia, and he said she could do it because technically we don't have to fast. So he allowed her not to fast even though the community did fast. So Rabbeinu Tam understood that individuals can choose not to fast. Now Rabbeinu Menachem HaMeiri, Menachem ben Shlomo HaMeiri, who lived in Provence in the 3rd century, writes this. He explains the following: Bizman sheyesh shalom, retzono lomar she'en yad ha'umot tekefa alenu. Says, what is the definition? He goes further. Says, when the Talmud says that when we have peace, we don't have to fast, it doesn't mean perfect peace and back in Israel and the building of the temple and no. He says, "Retzono lomar she'en yad ha'umot tekefa alenu," that we are not subjugated to the nations. We are independent. Would have our autonomy anywhere in the world. When we have autonomy, as Jews, we don't have to fast. En mit'anim ba'em afilu mitorat reshut. One should not fast on those days, even as an option. Meaning, he says, not only they're not mandatory, they're not optional. You don't have an option to say, okay, I understand that I'm not obligated to fast, but I want to fast. He says, no, you have no option. Why? The Navi Zechariah says clearly, those days will be days of joy and happiness. So, it's hard to argue that today we don't fall under this category. We are not subjugated to the nations. Yes, of course, we rely on the assistance of the United States, but the Prime Minister had no problems defying the administration of the United States several times. We're not dependent. We are an independent nation, and we're not persecuted anywhere in the world. Jews, and if there are certain pockets of people who live, let's say, in Iran, or I don't know if there's still Jews in Yemen. Not really. There's nowhere in the world where Jews would not live there, but they're not persecuted. They could always find a place to be without persecution. So according to the Meiri, not only you're not obligated, it's forbidden to fast. Because you're going against the words of the Prophet, who said, those days will become days of joy and happiness. It says, En shalom ve'en shmad, but if there's no peace nor persecution, sheyad ha'umot tekefa alenu, that we are subjugated to the nations, ela she'en gozrin alenu gezerot levatel et hamitzvot, that we are not independent, we are dependent on them, but there is no campaign to convert Jews to other religions or to forbid Jews from keeping certain mitzvot. That you could say in modern times, before the Holocaust, that was the situation in the Soviet Union. There was a special department called the Yevsektia, or the Jewish section, that was in charge of making sure that Jews do not do Brit Milah, and that remained after that. But even that doesn't exist today. So, Ratzu and Mitanin, so it is optional. So according to the Hameiri, either you don't fast as an option, or you're even not allowed. So that is his opinion. So the question is, why we're still fasting on those days? So there were other rabbis who understood that two things. One is that when you say Ratzu mit'anim, Ratzu mit'anim, it's up to you, right? They say up to whom? Not to you, not to us as a community, to the Bedin, to the rabbis. Now, why was it relegated to the rabbis? It's not written in the Talmud. Talmud says it's up to us because of conformity. It's easy, or uniformity. They want everybody to be on the same page. It's more than even the Lord is going to do. And we're afraid of, the fast day is a public display of in prayer and everything. So now one person will be in the restaurant eating. They didn't have restaurants back then, but one person will go to work and will eat there, and another will not. It's not a convenient situation. We better have all on the same page. The second thing was, as I mentioned yesterday, was that if people, and that's why the poskim rule that we keep on going with the default option of we always fast, because they said we'll have to reassess the situation every fast day. Not only in every community, but also from one day to another, it could change. So let's say if we consider, for example, attacks on Israel as a reason to fast, right? So after Shlomo Galil, after the first Lebanon war, you have a lull of a couple of years, you don't fast. Then the Intifada starts, let's fast again. Then it stops, but then you have a protective edge, so they said, it's easier just to not fast, just go with, we always fast. And that is what Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, writes. He says, רצו הציבור, אבל היחיד אין לו לפרוש מן הציבור, כל זמן שלא נמנו הציבור, שלא להתענות. Rabbeinu Asher says, it's up to the community. And when he says the community, we assume he means the leaders, the rabbis, and according to him, an individual who decides not to fast are not allowed to do that. He doesn't say it's forbidden or that it's punishable, but he says, "En lo lifrosh min hatzibur." It's not recommended, inappropriate for him not to be with the tzibur. Rabbeinu Nisim of Gerona, of Cherona, also in the mid 13th, 14th century, quotes the Ramban, and he says, "Achshav," he says, "רצו רוב ישראל והסכימו שלא להתענות, אין בדין מטריחין עליהם להתענות." He says, yes, there is a power to the people, to the community, that if most of them decide that they don't want to fast, the bedin would not impose on them.
Is this including Tisha B'Av?
No, we're just talking about the minor fast. The minor fast days. The Talmud already said that Tisha B'Av uchpelu b'tzarot is a special status. And he says, now everybody wants to fast, ונהגו להתענות, and this is our custom, לפיכך אסור ליחיד לפרוץ גדרן. Now, if a person individually will decide not to fast, is considered someone who's breaching the fence, meaning he's breaking the law. He says, לכך חייבים הכל להתענות מדברי קבלה ותקנת נביאים. We must keep the fast by the words of Kabbalah and by the words of Nevi'im, which is one and the same. When the Talmud says Divrei Kabbalah, they refer to the prophets. And then he adds another layer. He says, וכן ראיתי לרמב"ם ז"ל בפרק ה' מהלכות תענית שלא הזכיר בצומות הללו רצו כלל. Says, and if you look at Maimonides doesn't mention this possibility of the will of the people. So from the absence of that statement, Rabbeinu Nisim says, I see that Maimonides also agrees that we have no option. But if I look closely at Maimonides, I see this. He writes in his introduction to the laws of the fast days, he says, why are we fasting? ויהיה זה זיכרון למעשינו הרעים ומעשי אבותינו שהיה כמעשינו עתה עד שגרם להם ולנו אותן הצרות. Says we're fasting as a reminder that we are sinners just like our forefathers. And just as their evil actions cause them to be punished, so also it causes us. So, by that logic, if we are not suffering to the same extent that our forefathers were suffering, then we are relieved. and we are not suffering. You look at the history of the Jewish people.
In Esther, you can't say that.
What?
In Esther.
Right, no, Esther is
You can't.
Right, Esther is a different case altogether. Anyway, from Maimonides, we could still argue that Maimonides left us an opening by saying that the level of our suffering is the yardstick to whether we should fast or not. When we go on with the Poskim, interesting, Rabbi Yom Tov Asevi from Spain also he adds one word and then amends the whole thing. Says "Davar talui b'rtzon Yisrael." It depends on the will of the people. Ratzu bedin mit'anim, lo ratzu mit'anim klal. If the bedin wanted, then they fast, and if they don't want, they don't fast. Meaning, now that it's done, slowly over the generations, the choice moved from the individual to the community, from the community to the rabbis, now the bedin, and it's up to them. And finally, Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher in his Arba'at Urim writes, "V'ha'idana ratzu v'nagu lit'ano lefichach asur lifrotz gader." He quotes the Ramban and he says, "This is the custom. This is what we do. If you don't do it, you breach the fence." There was one rabbi later on. I mean, there were still rabbis who tried to change it, and was it a Talmid of the Nodab Yehuda, a very famous rabbi in Prague. And he writes, "Ma she'anu mit'anin eno ela minhaga." The reason that we fast is still only a custom. It says, don't tell me that we rely on the words of the prophets who said that it will be a fast day, because that only applies eno ela beyesh gezerah. That is only when we are under persecution. So we go back and forth. Finally, I give you one last statement on arguing that we should fast. And that comes from Rabbi Israel Lipschitz, who wrote a comprehensive commentary on the Mishnah. He lived in the beginning of the 19th century, and is considered he was very knowledgeable in terms of history, science. I think he graduated from one of the universities in Germany. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan wrote a book that uses his commentary on the scientific knowledge and how it has evolved and contributes to the Torah. However, he writes this. He says, yes, there was a rule that allowed people more flexibility with the fast days, allowed them to choose whether they want to fast or not. He says, "Be'et shenishnet ha-mishnah b'yimei Rabbi Achiava, de'Antoninus Kesar haya ohev Yisrael." He says this only applied at the time of the Mishnah, because the Emperor Anthony, or Antonius, was a friend of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, so we had relative peace. מי הוא הטור כתב דאשתה קיבלו ישראל עליהם חובה לכולהו עד שיבנה המקדש. But Rabbeinu Yaakov wrote, much later, that we've accepted it as a binding law until the rebuilding of the temple. So here we see something interesting. With time, how the status keeps developing. It's true that Rabbeinu Yaakov wrote that we have to that we follow the custom, but it didn't say until the temple will be rebuilt. That's an addition that Rabbi Israel Lipschitz puts in automatically. So now, if he says until the Beit HaMikdash will be rebuilt, that's it. We have no choice, right? But the other part of what he says is also very interesting. He argues that this only applied at the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, because there was relative peace, because the emperor was his friend. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, it's true, was very friendly with the emperor, and relatively the Romans treated us well at that short period of maybe 50, 60 years. But when did this happen? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was born in 135 of the Common Era, the same exact year that the Bar Kokhba revolt was terminated, and the Romans completely crushed the Jews, and there was total devastation in Israel. So Rabbi Hanassi was born there. By the time he grew up, he was still there were still vivid memories of everything that happened, and actually he was born 60 years after the destruction of the temple. So if this Rabbi Israel Lipschitz, in his Tiferet Israel, if he argues that at a time of peace, relative peace that came after such tremendous devastation, the destruction of the temple, the Bar Kokhba revolt. In between, there was another rebellion called Mered Atfutzot, the Kiriniki rebellion. After all these wars and all this devastation, the emperor is our friend, we're happy, we should not fast, then it should definitely apply today in our situation. So, to conclude, I would say this. Today, in the current state of affairs, the way we live as Jews around the world, there's no doubt that anyone who wants to rely individually on the opinions of the rabbis who say that either we don't have to or we're not allowed to fast, such as Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Adret, the Rashba, and the Meiri, and the Talmudic rule as was established, is allowed to do so. It is not considered an offense, and not considered a prohibition. Those who want to fast, they could rely on the opinions that said that we should continue. But for now, until the Batei Din or the rabbis, the courts, will together decide to reassess the situation, publicly the fast day should still be observed, but individually we could, those who choose should really could rely on that and say that they do not choose to fast. But it really has to be something that is done out of understanding and appreciation, and done as a gratitude to Hashem for bringing us to this situation where we realize that we are so much better off in the way we live as Jews in the world than our forefathers. 50 years ago, 2,000 years ago, we are much better off. We have to thank Hashem by that and turn the fast days into days of joy and happiness, as the Navi told us.